Why did the quiet waitress make a veteran freeze mid-sip? Mel's diner smelled of bacon grease, burnt toast, and something harder to name: resignation. The kind of air that clung to walls painted too many times, where hope came with free refills and tips barely covered the cost of gas. Every morning, Sarah Miller tied her apron, rolled her sleeves just long enough to hide what people whispered about, and moved through the place like she was invisible, which was exactly how she liked it. They called her the scarred waitress. Not Sarah, not Miss, just the scarred one. Like her name had burned away somewhere in the fire that made her hands what they were. Some customers looked away quickly, guilt flickering across their faces. Others didn't bother to hide the curiosity, the pity, or the disgust. And the cruelest of them, they laughed quietly, not at a joke, but at someone who had already endured enough. For 3 years, she had endured this same ritual. The sound of the bell over the door, the scrape of plates, the muffled laughter, and the soft ache that came from pretending she didn't hear any of it. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here because it was quiet, predictable, and safe as life could be after you walked through hell and come back with the proof written on your skin. But that morning, something felt off. A tension in the air she couldn't name. Maybe it was the man sitting alone in the corner booth, the one who had been there since dawn. He wasn't eating, barely drinking his coffee, just watching. Not with cruelty, not with pity. With recognition. Sarah noticed him the way a soldier notices patterns, a glance, a flicker, the subtle shift that says something's not right. He was older now, gray streaking through the edges of his hair, but there was a discipline in how he sat straight-backed even when tired, hands folded like he'd learned control through necessity. Every few minutes, his gaze drifted toward her left arm. Always her left. Always that sleeve. She brushed it off. Civilians stared, they always did, but this man's eyes weren't curious, they were haunted. The kind of haunted that only came from war. He reached into his jacket once briefly, as though touching something hidden inside, maybe a photograph. Then he stopped, as if the act itself hurt. When she passed by, she caught a faint whisper under his breath. It has to be her. But before she could react, the door chime screamed through the quiet clang, and everything shifted. 3 men walked in, loud and careless, wearing construction shirts stretched tight across gym-earned muscles. The leader carried himself like a man who'd been admired for too long and never questioned once. Chad Morrison, the kind of man who turned ordinary rooms into uncomfortable ones just by existing. The diner's easy murmur died down the second he spoke. "Well, boys," Chad drawled, tossing his sunglasses onto the table, "guess the circus came early." His friends laughed, that forced, mean kind of laugh people do when they're afraid to be the target next. Sarah sighed quietly, not out of fear but exhaustion. She'd seen tougher men break. She'd treated soldiers whose bravado evaporated under gunfire. But men like Chad, they were just noise. "Good morning, gentlemen. What can I get started for you today?" Her tone was calm, steady, professional. A voice that could deliver orders under fire or take them with equal control. Chad tilted his head, smirking. "What you can get started," he said loudly enough for half the diner to hear, "is dressing like it's not snowing outside. What's with the long sleeves, sweetheart? You hiding track marks or just embarrassed about that meth lab accident?" Laughter. Quick, cruel. From the tables around them, silence. Sarah's jaw tightened, but her face didn't change. That was her armor now, stillness. Because reacting meant feeding them, and she'd already fought wars that mattered. She could handle this. But from the corner booth, the quiet man, Michael Kelly, tensed. His hand tightened around his coffee mug until his knuckles went white. He'd seen this play out before, not in diners, but in mess halls, checkpoints, streets filled with dust and fear. Weak men using cruelty to feel powerful, and strong people staying silent to survive. He watched the way Sarah's eyes stayed calm, her movements precise, the way she subtly positioned her body, left side turned away, keeping that arm hidden. There was something about her stance, muscle memory, discipline, not waitress posture, soldier posture. He'd been trained to recognize it. The cook peered through the service window, frowning. An elderly couple shifted uncomfortably in their booth. No one spoke. "Well," Chad pressed, leaning back. "Nothing to say, sweetheart, or are you waiting for me to throw a few more dollars on the floor so you can crawl for it?" His crew laughed again, more uneasily this time. Sarah didn't flinch. She wrote their order down, her hands steady. "Pancake special for you, sir." He blinked, thrown off. "Excuse me. You said circus came early. Pancake specials got clowns. Thought it might fit." A small ripple of laughter came from another booth, quiet but real. Chad's face flushed, his control slipped. Michael could feel the change like static in the air. Something was building, that tension before impact, the half-second before detonation. He knew it because he'd lived it. Chad stood, his chair scraping across the floor with a sound like metal on bone. "You think you're funny," he growled. Sarah didn't answer. She learned that silence could be more powerful than shouting. But as she reached for the coffee pot, her sleeve slipped slightly, revealing the faint edge of a scar. Chad saw it, smirked. "Well, boys, looks like I was right. Look at that. Burn marks. Told you, meth lab explosion." The laughter came again, sharper now. Sarah froze for half a breath, just long enough for memories to flicker, heat, fire, screams. Then she exhaled, steadying herself. Just another day, she told herself. Just another idiot. But Michael, he was on his feet before he realized it. Something in him couldn't stay still. Not this time. Not after 18 years of searching. He was close now. Close enough to see the small tremor in her left hand as she adjusted the coffee pot. He'd seen that tremor before, not weakness, but restraint. The way soldiers fight the urge to act until they must. "Hey," Chad said, stepping forward, "I'm talking to you." He reached into his wallet and pulled out 2 wrinkled dollar bills. "Here, your tip, sweetheart. Go buy some scar cream or maybe a mask." He dropped the bills on the floor. The sound, paper hitting tile, echoed like gunfire. Sarah stared at them for a long second. She bent down slowly, deliberate, graceful even now. Her fingers brushed the money. And Chad shoved her. It wasn't hard enough to injure, but enough to send her stumbling. Enough for her sleeve to ride up. Enough to reveal the truth. The room went silent. Not the silence of guilt, but of revelation. Because across her forearm, bold and unmistakable, was a tattoo. Black ink, faded by time but clear as day. 3rd Infantry Division, Ramadi 2006. 2 crossed rifles. The mark of someone who had lived through things civilians couldn't imagine. Michael froze mid-step, his breath caught. He knew that insignia. He'd worn it. And suddenly, the diner wasn't a diner anymore. It was a desert. The smell of coffee replaced by burning fuel. The sound of chatter by the ringing echo of an IED. He could hear it, the explosion, the screaming, the voice that had pulled him through the flames. A voice he'd never forgotten. The cook stopped moving. The old man with the cane stood halfway, trembling. Even Chad's friends had gone pale, sensing something they couldn't name. One of the younger customers whispered, that's a military tattoo." And in that moment, everything changed. Michael's cup shattered on the table as he stood fully, hands trembling. "3rd Infantry," he whispered, his voice cracking. The words hung heavy, charged with recognition. Sarah turned, startled, her eyes wide, uncertain. For a second, she looked ready to run. Then she saw his expression, not anger, not pity. Recognition, awe, something holy. You, he whispered. Ramadi, summer of '06. Her breath caught, the color drained from her face. How do you know that? Michael swallowed hard, stepping closer. Because I was there. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a faded photograph. A young soldier grinning beside a group of men and one woman in uniform. You pulled me out of that Humvee. You saved my life. The tray slipped from Sarah's hand and crashed to the floor. Cups shattered, coffee spread like blood across the tiles. Her body trembled, every wall she'd built cracking all at once. No, she whispered. They told me you didn't make it, that you died in Germany. Michael shook his head, tears brimming. I made it because of you. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. The diner was still. The only sound was the hum of the neon sign and the distant hiss of bacon left unattended. Then somewhere near the counter, a woman gasped softly, not at horror but realization. The scarred waitress wasn't broken. She was a hero in hiding. But the story wasn't done. Because while Sarah stood there, trembling, the weight of 18 years pressing against her, Chad, red-faced and clueless, started laughing again. Oh, this is rich, he sneered. You expect me to believe that you were some kind of soldier, please. Maybe you peeled potatoes, maybe you watched movies about war. The words slashed through the air, small and pathetic but still sharp enough to sting. Michael's jaw clenched, his voice dropped to something cold, dangerous. Be very careful with your next words. The entire diner seemed to lean forward, breath held, caught between history and justice. And in that fragile moment, that quiet before the storm, the past began to rise. Old ghosts stirring, old debts waiting to be paid. Because the woman they called Monster was about to remind them what real courage looked like. Why did the air feel heavier than it should in that tiny diner? Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the sizzle from the grill, the uneven rhythm of the old ceiling fan, felt amplified, like the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah stood motionless. One hand clutched the corner of the counter for balance, the other hung limply by her side, sleeves still pulled high, scars exposed. The marks glistened faintly beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, each line and contour a map of pain carved by fire and time. Chad Morrison's smirk flickered. For the first time that morning, uncertainty crossed his face, not regret, not yet just confusion. He could feel something changing around him, like a shift in gravity, but he didn't understand it. Men like him rarely did. What's the matter? He said, his tone sharper now forced. I was joking, relax. No one laughed. Even his crew stared at the floor, shame spreading faster than courage ever had. Michael Kelly's voice broke the silence. Low, controlled, but trembling with something deeper than anger. 3rd Infantry, he repeated softly. Ramadi, July 2006. The words carried across the room like a memory resurfacing from a grave. You don't forget that heat, he said. You don't forget the smell of burning fuel and cordite, or the sound of someone screaming your name through the flames. Sarah blinked, her lips parted but no words came out. Because she could see it too, the road, the convoy, the flash of light that had torn everything apart. For 18 years she'd buried those moments, one shift at a time, one cup of coffee after another, until they felt like someone else's story. But now, standing in front of the one man who shouldn't be alive, the walls cracked. Her eyes shimmered with disbelief. You were in vehicle too, she whispered. Michael nodded, eyes wet. You pulled me out, you dragged me through fire. Chad exhaled loudly, breaking the fragile moment like glass under a boot. Oh, come on, he scoffed. This is ridiculous. What now? She's a war hero. Please look at her. He gestured towards Sarah with a dismissive flick of his wrist. She's just a messed up waitress with a sob story. You think heroes end up here, in a diner, wearing hand-me-downs. Michael turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Yeah," he said softly, "sometimes they do." He stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. "You ever seen a soldier after the war over, Chad? After the ceremonies and flags and speeches fade away, they end up in diners. They end up invisible, because the world moves on and the heroes it created, they don't fit anymore." The older man at table 3, Harold, the one with the cane, let out a low murmur. "God help us," he said quietly. His wife squeezed his hand, eyes glistening. Sarah tried to speak, but her throat locked. Everything inside her was trembling, not from fear, but from being seen. The armor she'd worn for years wasn't built for gratitude. It was built for survival. And right now it was failing. Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn, folded photograph. The edges were frayed, the surface creased so many times the image was faint, but it was enough. A younger Michael, his arm around two soldiers, Rodriguez and Thompson. And standing slightly apart from them, expression calm but eyes alert, Sarah Miller, medic 3rd Infantry Division. The photo trembled in his shaking hand. "You see this?" Michael said, showing it to the room. "She saved every one of us that night. We hit an IED coming back from patrol. Flames, smoke, ammo cooking off. I was trapped. Rodriguez was driving. Thompson was bleeding out. Everyone thought it was over." He looked at Sarah, his voice tightening. "She broke protocol, ignored orders, ran into the fire, pulled me out through a window half her size. She went back for Thompson. She didn't stop, not even when the second IED hit. She shielded me with her body." His voice cracked. "Those scars you've been laughing at, Chad, they're the reason I'm standing here." The diner was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Sarah's lip trembled. She'd forgotten how his voice sounded, the way it carried calm even in chaos. And now, hearing it tremble because of her, something inside her began to break open. "I thought you died," she whispered. Michael shook his head slowly. "I almost did, but you wouldn't let me." He placed the photo on the counter between them, like evidence laid out before a jury. Every person in that room became a witness. Even the young college kid with earbuds half hanging out looked away from his phone, guilt blooming on his face. He'd laughed earlier, he wasn't laughing now. Sarah's hands began to shake. "I don't talk about it," she said softly. "Not because I'm ashamed, but because no one wants to hear it. People see the scars and think I must have earned them doing something stupid, or wrong, or deserved." Her voice broke. "I got tired of correcting them." Michael's expression softened. "You shouldn't have to." Chad took a half step backward, sensing too late that he was no longer the loudest voice in the room. Still, arrogance is hard to extinguish in men who have built their worth on noise. He laughed again, weaker now, a desperate sound. "So what, you expect me to believe this? That this," he pointed at Sarah, his tone brittle, "this waitress was out there playing G.I. Jane?" The old man at table 3 stood fully now. His cane hit the floor with a sharp crack. "I served in Vietnam," he said, voice low and steady. "And I can tell you one thing, I know courage when I see it. You wouldn't last an hour in the kind of fire she walked through." Applause didn't erupt, not yet, but something just as powerful spread. Shame, collective, heavy, suffocating shame. The kind that makes bystanders look away, realizing they'd been silent too long. Michael's jaw clenched. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire diner. "Sit down, son," he said. Chad didn't move. "I said sit down." It wasn't shouted, but every syllable carried command. Years of discipline, authority forged in war, echoed through it. Even the fry cook stopped breathing. Chad hesitated, then sat. Michael turned to Sarah again, and in that moment it wasn't soldier to soldier. It was survivor to survivor. "I looked for you," he said quietly. "For 18 years. Every VA hospital, every reunion, every forum. I thought you were gone. They told me you were medically discharged, that you didn't want to be found. Sarah's eyes glistened. I couldn't. After the surgeries, the rehab, the nightmares, she swallowed hard. I didn't know how to be me anymore. The army had rules. Civilian life had none, and I couldn't stand the way people stared. Her words came haltingly now, like the first confession after a long silence. They gave me medals, letters, folded flags for the ones I couldn't save, but none of it fixed anything. I still woke up to the sound of fire. Michael nodded slowly. I know, he said, me too. Something shifted in the room, a quiet understanding that this wasn't just about war anymore. It was about wounds the world couldn't see. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her eyes met Chad's, then the rest of the diner. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for me, she said. I just want to be treated like a person, not a punchline, not a monster. The cook behind the counter wiped at his eyes. Damn right, he muttered. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he pulled something else from his jacket, a dog tag, charred at the edges, threaded on a thin chain. He held it up. You left this, he said softly. They found it near the wreck. I kept it, figured one day I'd find its owner. He extended his hand. I think this belongs to you. Sarah stared at it like it was a ghost. The metal glinted under the flickering light, the letters barely legible from the heat that once engulfed it. Miller, SAOPOS, U.S. Army. Her breath caught. Her hand hovered above it, then finally closed around the tag. The metal was cold now, but it burned in her palm with memory. Tears welled in her eyes, the kind she'd refused for years. When she spoke, her voice was small, almost childlike. I never thought I'd see that again. Michael smiled faintly. Neither did I. The diner felt smaller now, closer. The people who had watched in judgment minutes earlier were now silent witnesses to something sacred. No one dared break it. But then the moment shifted again. A vibration. A ringtone. Loud, invasive. Chad's phone buzzed across the table, the screen lighting up with messages. He snatched it up instinctively, but the whispers started instantly. Check social media, someone murmured. It's all over already. The college kid had been recording since Michael started talking. The live stream had spread like wildfire. Chad's face drained of color as he looked down at the flood of notifications. Mentions, tags, comments. Branson Construction was trending, not for building homes, but for breaking decency. He muttered something under his breath, maybe an apology, maybe a curse. No one cared. The court of public opinion was already in session. Michael turned away from him, his expression calm again. He looked at Sarah, his tone gentle. You don't have to hide anymore. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her scarred hand, no longer trying to conceal it. For the first time in years, she let the sleeve stay rolled up. Her arm, once a secret, was now a story told without words. And people were finally listening. As she stood there, trembling but unbroken, a truth settled quietly into the room. Sometimes dignity doesn't need to shout, it just stands its ground. Outside, sunlight pushed through the grime-streaked window, landing across Sarah's arm like a soft salute. For the first time in years, she didn't move to hide from it. But deep inside, one question still echoed in both of them. How do you live after walking through fire? Neither knew the answer yet. But the next few hours would show them that sometimes healing begins not with forgiveness, but with being seen. What does fire sound like when it remembers your name? The question lived inside Sarah Miller's head long after the world around her went still. Even now, in that diner, in that moment where past and present collided, she could hear it. The fire. It had a voice. A memory, and it whispered to her every night when she closed her eyes. Michael Kelly stood just a few feet away, his breath still unsteady from everything that had surfaced. He was seeing her again, not the waitress in a faded apron, but the medic from another lifetime. The woman who had run toward a burning Humvee without hesitation, her hands blistering as she pulled strangers from an inferno. He thought that night was buried, but now it was here again, alive, breathing through the trembling silence between them. "Tell them," she said suddenly, her voice soft but firm. Michael blinked. "What?" "Tell them what happened," Sarah whispered. "Tell them everything." He hesitated, his eyes searching hers for permission. She nodded once. And the diner, as if sensing it was about to witness something sacred, fell completely still. Michael drew in a breath that trembled with years of ghosts. His words came slowly at first, like someone unlocking a memory that had rusted shut. "July 15, 2006, Ramadi," he began. It was 120 degrees in the shade, and there wasn't much shade to begin with. Just dust. Miles and miles of dust that stuck to your skin and your soul. We'd been out since dawn, routine patrol, or so they told us. He paused, eyes distant, lost somewhere the rest of them couldn't see. "You start to believe in routine out there," he said, "until the desert reminds you there's no such thing." Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her chest, as if steadying her heartbeat against memories trying to surface. She didn't want to remember, but she owed it to the ghosts who never came back. Michael's tone darkened. "We were 3 vehicles. I was in the lead, Rodriguez was driving, Thompson was manning the gun, and Sarah." He glanced at her. "She was in vehicle 2, our medic, always quiet, always calm, the kind of calm that made everyone else believe they might survive the day." Sarah exhaled shakily. She could still smell it, the diesel, the cordite, the acrid tang of burning air. Michael's voice softened. "I remember thinking the horizon looked wrong. You learn to see that. Shadows too still, ground too smooth. I was about to radio it in when—" He stopped. The sound that followed wasn't from his throat, it was from his memory. An explosion. Every head in the diner seemed to flinch. Michael swallowed hard. "You don't really hear the blast," he said. "You feel it, like the world folds in on itself." The first IED took the front axle clean off. The Humvee flipped twice before landing on its side. Rodriguez never had a chance. The fuel tank ruptured. He looked down at his trembling hands. "I was trapped. The door bent inward, flames coming in through the vents. Thompson was unconscious. I tried to move him." Sarah's breathing quickened. Her fingers pressed against her temples, as if she could stop the images clawing their way out. "I heard the call," she whispered. "Over comms, vehicle 1 hit, casualties unknown." The diner had dissolved for her. She was there again, desert sun, heat waves rising off the sand, the metallic taste of adrenaline. Her voice came out low, raw. "Protocol said stay back, wait for the reaction team, but waiting, a death sentence when the fire's spreading." Michael nodded faintly. She didn't wait. Sarah's eyes were distant now, fixed on something only she could see. "The flames were taller than the Humvee," she said. "I remember the sound, not like in movies, it screams. Fire screams when it eats metal, when it eats people." She swallowed, her throat trembling. "I don't even remember deciding to go. One second I was crouched behind the second vehicle, the next I was running." Michael closed his eyes. Through open ground, fully exposed, every sniper in that city could have had her in their sights. Sarah barely heard him. She was lost in the rhythm of memory, her boots pounding the sand, gear clanking against her body, lungs burning. "I reached the Humvee. The fire was everywhere. The door wouldn't move. I used my knife, pried at the frame until it bent enough to see inside." Her voice faltered. "I saw you, you were on fire." Michael's lips trembled. "You didn't stop." "I couldn't," she said. I just couldn't. Her gaze unfocused, her voice turning to a whisper. You were trying to pull Thompson. Your gloves were melting. I remember grabbing you, pulling you out first, dragging you through the window. Her breath hitched. I lost half my gear doing it. My sleeves caught fire. The skin, she stopped, steadying herself. The skin came with it. The silence in Mel's diner was complete. Not even the coffee pot dared bubble. Michael's voice came next, barely audible. You went back. Sarah nodded once. Thompson was still inside. I thought I could get him. I remember shouting his name. He didn't move. Her fingers curled against the counter, as though gripping invisible metal. The second explosion, it was closer. I saw the wire under the sand, knew what it was, knew I couldn't reach cover in time. Her next words came in fragments. So I threw myself over you. I thought maybe if the blast hit me first, it'd spare you. Michael's eyes filled. It did. She looked at him, the faintest ghost of a smile trembling across her face. Guess I was right. He swallowed hard. When they pulled us out, they said you were gone. No pulse, no ID, everything burned beyond recognition. They told me later you'd been medevaced, but I never found you, I thought. He broke off, his voice failing. Sarah shook her head. I didn't want to be found. I woke up in Germany with half my skin gone, spent months learning how to move again. Every mirror felt like punishment. Her voice cracked, low and honest. When I came home, people didn't see a veteran. They saw a freak, so I stopped correcting them. Michael's jaw clenched, his voice softened. You saved 17 people that year. You carried more than any one person ever should. She gave a small, tired laugh. And what did it get me? Burned scars and a bad back. But then quieter and peace. I thought hiding was peace, but it's not. It's just silence. Michael nodded slowly. And silence can rot a person. The young man with the phone, who'd been live streaming the whole time, lowered it quietly now. The glow of the screen dimmed, the record button fading. No one wanted to turn something this human into content anymore. Sarah's voice softened. People always say war makes heroes, but it doesn't. It makes survivors, and sometimes surviving feels like betrayal. Michael met her gaze, and for the first time she saw the same guilt reflected in his eyes. Every year on July 15th, he said quietly, I drink to the ones who didn't make it, but I always stop before the second glass, because the second one feels like I'm toasting myself. A faint tremor passed through Sarah's lips. You ever stop hearing it, the sound? Michael shook his head slowly. No, you just learn to live between the echoes. The cook stepped forward then, big man, gray at the temples, wiping his hands on a rag he forgot he was holding. My brother didn't come back from Fallujah, he said softly. I never got to thank the medics who tried to save him, so thank you, both of you. Sarah blinked hard. Her lips parted but no words came. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like hiding. Michael turned back to Chad, who sat pale and silent. The earlier bravado burned away. Do you understand now? He asked quietly. Those scars you mocked, they're the price of someone else's tomorrow. Chad opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. He nodded, small and stiff, like a man realizing what shame truly felt like. Sarah took a long breath, the kind that trembles when pain and release overlap. Her eyes drifted to the window, where daylight spilled across the counter. I used to think these scars were punishment, she said, but maybe they're proof. Michael tilted his head. Proof of what? That love isn't always gentle, she whispered. Sometimes it's brutal, sometimes it burns. Her words hung in the air, soft, fragile but unbreakable. Even the old neon sign buzzing above the door seemed to quiet down, as though paying respect. Michael reached out and touched her forearm gently, just above the tattoo, where the ink met the scar tissue. It wasn't pity, it was reverence. Welcome back, Sergeant, he said. Sarah's breath caught. No one had called her that in 18 years. And for the first time since that day in Ramadi, she felt something like peace stir deep inside her chest. Not freedom from pain, just the acceptance of it. Because pain meant she had lived. And living, after all that, was its own kind of courage. As she looked around the diner, the faces that once held judgment now carried awe. A room full of strangers had just witnessed what real heroism looked like. Not loud, not perfect, but scarred and standing. The college student whispered to no one in particular, "I'll never forget this." Harold nodded solemnly. "Good," he said, "don't." Michael turned back to Sarah, his voice gentle. "You saved me once out there. Let me return the favor." She frowned slightly. "How?" "By making sure the world sees you this time." Sarah hesitated, eyes dropping to her hands, the same hands that had carried lives and loss. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. Michael smiled faintly. "No one ever is." The cook cleared his throat, his deep voice cutting softly through the quiet. "I think I speak for everyone when I say, breakfast is on the house, Sergeant." Laughter, small, uncertain but warm, rippled through the diner, the kind of laughter that doesn't mock, the kind that heals. Sarah blinked hard again, fighting the tears rising too easily now. She managed a small smile. "Copy that, Chief." Michael chuckled, shaking his head, still giving orders. Sarah's eyes glimmered, still following them. Outside, the sunlight had shifted softer now, glowing gold against the glass. The kind of light that belongs to endings or beginnings. As Sarah stood there looking at Michael, something unspoken passed between them. Forgiveness, maybe, or something quieter, recognition. Two lives scarred by the same fire, finally standing in the same room again. And though no one noticed it but her, the fire's voice, that cruel whisper from years ago, had gone silent at last. What replaced it was something gentler, like the faint echo of a heartbeat. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't the ones fought in deserts or jungles. They're the ones fought in quiet rooms, when no one is watching. And sometimes, victory looks nothing like glory, just two survivors finally letting themselves breathe. Why does truth always arrive louder than silence? For a long, fragile minute, Mel's diner existed in a kind of stunned stillness, as if everyone had collectively forgotten how to breathe. The smell of coffee hung in the air, untouched. The cook's spatula sizzled faintly where it rested against the hot griddle. Outside, the sun beat against the windows, but no one noticed. Every pair of eyes in that room was fixed on Sarah Miller. Her sleeves were still rolled up. Her scars, visible now, unhidden, caught the light like ripples of molten glass. Some looked away, not out of disgust this time but reverence. Others simply watched, realizing that they had witnessed something rare, a truth unwrapped before them, raw and undeniable. Sarah felt their eyes, but she didn't flinch. For once, she didn't try to hide. Michael stood near her still, the photo and dog tag resting on the counter like sacred relics. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them carried more weight than words ever could. And then, a vibration. A sound that didn't belong to that quiet moment. Chad Morrison's phone lit up again, buzzing violently across the table. He reached for it instinctively, but froze when he saw the screen. Notifications, hundreds of them, mentions, comments, tags. The video was everywhere. The college student had streamed the entire confrontation. The insults, the reveal, the confession, the truth. The world outside Mel's diner was watching. "Oh hell," Chad muttered under his breath. The cook leaned out from behind the counter. "What's going on?" The young man, still holding his phone, turned the screen toward them. "You're trending," he whispered. "Like right now, 500,000 views in 20 minutes." Gasps spread like ripples through the room. Sarah blinked, disoriented. Trending. The word felt foreign to her, like a language she'd left behind when she traded combat boots for quiet corners. She didn't know what to do with it, didn't want it. Michael looked at her gently. It means people are finally seeing you. But his voice carried both pride and warning. Across the diner, Chad had gone pale. He scrolled through his phone, his face tightening with every notification. A comment thread was already forming, people calling him every name imaginable, tagging his company, Branson Construction, veterans pages, even local news outlets. Someone had clipped the moment when Michael stood and said, "You dare question her service." It was spreading like wildfire, thousands sharing, quoting, applauding. "You're not worthy to polish her boots," one caption read. It was everywhere. "Oh my God," Chad whispered, the reality settling like ash. "My boss, my wife." He looked up desperate. "Listen, I didn't mean." But no one was listening anymore. Michael turned toward him, his expression calm but unyielding. "You meant every word," he said quietly. "That's the problem." The bell over the kitchen door clanged open then, and the diner's manager, Bob Hutchinson, stepped out. He was a big man with a worn face and a faded Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm, the kind of man who'd seen his own share of ghosts. "What in God's name is going on out here?" he demanded. A customer handed him their phone. "Watch this," they said. "You'll understand." Bob watched the video in silence, the laughter, the shove, the moment Sarah's sleeve fell back, the tattoo, Michael's speech. His jaw tightened as he handed the phone back. "Chad Morrison," he said, his tone low and steady. "Get out of my diner." Chad looked up sharply. "Bob, come on, Now," Bob said again, "before I throw you out myself." A murmur swept through the customers, approval, anger, relief all tangled together. Chad rose slowly, but his path to the door was blocked by half a dozen patrons who didn't move aside. Even the old man with the cane, Harold, had positioned himself squarely between Chad and the exit. "I think you owe the lady an apology first," Harold said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of generations. Chad swallowed hard. His arrogance had evaporated. What remained was something smaller. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't know, I shouldn't have said." Sarah shook her head gently. "You shouldn't have needed to know," she said softly, "to be decent." The words hit harder than any slap could have. Michael stepped back, letting her speak. This was her moment, not his. Chad nodded weakly, fumbling for his phone as if it could somehow protect him. It buzzed again, this time with a call. The screen flashed. "Branson Construction Supervisor." He answered, hands trembling. "Sir." The voice on the other end was loud enough that everyone could hear. "Morrison, what the hell have you done? We've got thousands of messages flooding every line. Local news is calling. The owner's furious. You're finished. Do you hear me? You're fired. Don't come in. Don't use our name again. And pray this doesn't turn legal." Then click. The phone went dead. Chad stood frozen, the color draining from his face. He looked around at the room, the eyes, the judgment, the quiet satisfaction. But none of it came from cruelty. It came from justice. He left without another word. The bell over the door jingled softly as it closed behind him, leaving only the hum of the neon sign and the faint sound of someone crying, though no one could tell if it was from sadness or relief. Bob turned toward Sarah, his voice softened. 3 years you've worked here, and I never knew." Sarah shrugged lightly, wiping at her eyes. "I didn't think it mattered." He shook his head. "It matters. Hell, it matters more than most things." He took a deep breath, visibly collecting himself. "You're not just an employee, Sarah. You're family. Effective immediately, your shift manager. And if anyone ever gives you grief about those scars again, they answer to me. Understood?" His tone left no room for argument. Sarah blinked. Her lips parted, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was nod. The cook clapped his hands once, loud and decisive. "About damn time," he muttered, earning a few chuckles from the crowd, the kind that breaks tension like a dawn after storm. Then, unexpectedly, applause began. It started softly, a single pair of hands near the counter, then spread like a tide. Customers stood clapping, some crying openly. Not for spectacle, not for pity. For respect. Sarah stood in the center of it all, trembling. Her hand instinctively rose, not to cover her scars, but to brush a tear from her cheek. She hadn't cried in years. She'd trained herself not to. But this wasn't weakness. This was release. Michael watched, his throat tight. He'd spent 18 years searching for this moment, not just to find her, but to see her seen. The applause faded into quiet again. Bob exhaled, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "This place has seen some things," he said, "but this is one for the history books." He looked toward the wall by the register. "I'm putting your photo up there, Sarah, in uniform. You've earned that." Sarah gave a small laugh through her tears. "You really don't have to." He cut her off gently. "I'm not asking permission." Michael smiled faintly. "He's right, you know." Sarah glanced at him. "Feels strange, all this attention. I spent so long trying to disappear." "Maybe it's time to stop disappearing," he said softly. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two soldiers standing on very different battlefields, both learning how to live again. Outside, through the diner's smudged windows, the first local news van pulled into the parking lot. Someone had called them, maybe one of the viewers online, maybe no one at all. But the story had spread beyond their control now. Sarah saw the reporters, the cameras, the microphones. Her heart tightened. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I just wanted quiet." Michael's hand found hers steady. "You've earned more than quiet. You've earned truth." She looked at him, searching his eyes for something she wasn't sure she wanted. "I'm not a hero," she said quietly. Michael smiled sadly. "Heroes never think they are." Bob moved toward the door, ready to turn the reporters away, but Sarah stopped him. "Let them in," she said. He hesitated. "You sure?" She nodded slowly. "If my story helps one other veteran stop hiding, then it's worth it." When the reporters entered, the diner didn't feel like a diner anymore. It felt like a memorial, alive and breathing. Microphones hovered, cameras blinked red. And there she was, the scarred waitress, the hidden soldier, standing in the same spot where she'd been humiliated just an hour before. One reporter asked softly, "Can you tell us your name, ma'am?" Sarah straightened. "Sergeant Sarah Miller," she said. "United States Army, 3rd Infantry Division." Her voice didn't tremble. The flash of cameras reflected off the window, catching the faint shimmer of her scars. But this time, they looked like armor. Michael stood just behind her, quiet, respectful, proud. One of the reporters asked, "Why didn't you ever tell anyone who you were?" Sarah looked down for a moment, then answered simply, "Because people see scars before they see people. I got tired of trying to explain what I'd survived." Another asked, "And now?" She paused, then lifted her head. "Now I'm done hiding." The room fell silent again. Even the reporters lowered their microphones. Because something about the way she said it didn't feel like a quote. It felt like a declaration. Outside, the sunlight caught the edges of the diner sign, MELS, flickering faintly in the breeze. And for the first time in years, Sarah didn't flinch when the light touched her skin. Later, when the crowd finally thinned and the news crews packed up, the diner returned to its quiet hum. Michael lingered by the counter, sipping a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Sarah wiped down a table, lost in thought. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. "You know," Michael said finally, "I think Rodriguez would have liked this place." Sarah smiled softly. Yeah, he liked his coffee burnt. Michael chuckled. Guess he'd fit right in. She looked at him then, her expression thoughtful. You ever think we make it out for a reason? He met her eyes. Every day, still trying to figure out what that reason is. Maybe this, she said quietly. Maybe reminding people that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons. Michael smiled, and sometimes they still give orders. She grinned faintly. Old habits. The bell over the door rang again as a customer left, the sound bright against the evening quiet. Outside, the light was fading, that soft, golden hour glow that made the scars on Sarah's arms look less like damage and more like art. She stood there, watching the sunset bleed through the glass, feeling something she hadn't in a long time. Hoping. Not loud or dramatic, just steady, like a heartbeat finally finding its rhythm again. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't come with medals or headlines. Sometimes it comes in the form of peace, the kind that whispers you survived. Now live. How long does it take to silence a world that suddenly remembers your name? 6 months had passed since that morning in Mel's diner. 6 months since the video that changed everything. Half a year since a scarred waitress became a headline, a symbol, a meme, a debate, and then something else. Time, Sarah had learned, didn't move in a straight line anymore. It stuttered between past and present, noise and silence. The diner looked different now. Not dramatically, just softer. The walls were freshly painted. A new coffee machine hummed where the old one had rattled for years. But the biggest change hung right behind the register, a framed photograph of Sergeant Sarah Miller, taken years ago in Iraq. Helmet tilted, eyes fierce. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Our hero, our friend." And below that, smaller letters, almost hidden unless you leaned close. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Sarah had argued against the display at first. People will stare, she'd said. Bob, her boss, had replied, they already do, let 'em stare at the right thing this time. And so the photo stayed. Mornings at Mel's were busier now. Veterans stopped by from neighboring towns, some to shake her hand, others just to sit quietly nearby. College students came too, pretending they just liked the pancakes, but always sneaking glances at the wall. Even local law enforcement ate there more often, their badges glinting under the soft diner lights like quiet gestures of solidarity. Fame hadn't made Sarah rich. It had made her visible, and that was something she was still learning to live with. She poured coffee for an old farmer who saluted her every morning and pretended not to notice when she blushed. Her hand still trembled when someone mentioned Ramadi, and she still flinched at sudden noises, but she smiled more now. Not because the scars hurt less, but because they meant something again. At least, that's what she told herself. Sometimes, when the diner emptied after the lunch rush, she'd stand alone at the counter, looking at her reflection in the stainless steel of the coffee pot. Her face had changed, not just from the scars, but from the years of hiding. Now people wanted to hear her story. They called her brave, inspiring, heroic. But none of those words felt right. Hero. The word always caught in her throat like smoke. Because heroes didn't wake up shaking from nightmares. Heroes didn't avoid mirrors. Heroes didn't wonder if maybe, just maybe, they should have died too. The nightmares hadn't stopped. They'd only gone quieter. And silence could be worse than screams. She thought the world seeing her might bring peace. Instead, it brought questions. Interviews, podcasts, reporters. Every one of them asking the same thing. How does it feel to be a hero? Her answer never changed. It feels heavy. The public loved that quote. They shared it everywhere, turned it into an inspirational graphic, layered it over photos of sunsets and American flags. but none of them knew what the word heavy really meant. She did. Michael still visited often, once every few weeks. Sometimes they'd talk for hours. Other times they'd sit in comfortable silence, the kind forged between people who had seen too much and didn't need words to fill the gaps. He'd retired from the military shortly after the reunion, started counseling other veterans. "Talking helps," he'd told her once. She had smiled faintly. "So you talk now?" He'd shrugged. "Mostly I listen." He still carried that photograph in his jacket pocket, the one of their squad, before everything changed. Sometimes he left it on the counter beside his coffee, like a silent offering. Sarah never touched it, but she always noticed. It was late one Friday afternoon when the bell over the diner door chimed, and a quiet fell that didn't match the usual rush of customers. Chad Morrison walked in. For a second, no one moved. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the jukebox seemed to hesitate on a note. Sarah looked up from behind the counter. He looked different. Thinner, older. His eyes didn't have that same sharp, mocking gleam, just a kind of subdued weariness. He wasn't wearing his company shirt anymore. Instead, he had on a plain work vest covered in volunteer patches: Veterans Assistance Center, Project Rebuild, Service and Sacrifice Fundraiser. His hands, once soft, were calloused and stained with paint. He carried an envelope. The whisper of recognition moved through the diner like wind through tall grass. Chad cleared his throat, eyes down. "I know I'm not exactly welcome here," he said quietly, "but I needed to deliver this myself." He placed the envelope on the counter. Sarah didn't move toward it yet. She just looked at him, steady, unreadable. Chad swallowed. "After that day, everything went downhill fast. Lost my job, my wife left, couldn't find work. I was angry. At you, at everyone. Then one of my friends, a vet, actually told me to stop feeling sorry for myself and start showing up." He gestured to his vest. "So I did." A pause. He rubbed the back of his neck, visibly nervous. "4 months now, I've been volunteering at the Veterans Center, painting, fixing things, listening, trying to do something that matters." His voice trembled. "That's $5,000. Donations we raised for wounded service members. I wanted to give it to you to donate in your name." The diner was silent again, but this time not from shock, from something gentler. People watched, waiting for Sarah's response. She studied him carefully. He wasn't the same man who had thrown money on the floor and laughed. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was humility, the kind that doesn't beg for forgiveness, only tries to earn it. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "You've changed." Chad nodded. "I had to. I couldn't keep pretending that what I did that day was just a mistake. It was who I was, and that scared me." He hesitated. "They made me work for it, you know, the veterans at the center. They didn't trust me at first. Made me show up every day, no excuses. Said redemption isn't given, it's earned." Sarah looked down at the envelope, then back at him. "They were right." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, they were." From the back booth, Michael rose quietly and approached, his presence calm but firm, like an anchor in uncertain waters. "You kept showing up," he said. "That counts for something." Chad met his eyes. "You believe in second chances." Michael gave a small nod. "I believe in the work it takes to deserve them." Chad exhaled a long, shaky breath, as though he'd been holding it for months. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said softly. "I just wanted to do something right." Sarah picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. She didn't open it. Instead, she looked at the writing on the back, handwritten names, signatures, small notes. For those who served. For the medic who didn't give up. From one broken soul to another. Her throat tightened. "These people," she murmured, "they trust you now." He nodded. They told me I had to earn the right to deliver this myself. Sarah placed the envelope in the register drawer, closing it gently. Everyone deserves a second chance, she said softly. That's what service taught me. Sometimes you save people who wouldn't save you. Her eyes softened. Sometimes that's what makes us human. Chad looked down, blinking hard. Thank you. Sarah shook her head. Don't thank me, just keep showing up. He nodded once, then turned to leave. But before he reached the door, Sarah called after him. Chad. He stopped, glancing back. The Veterans Center could use someone consistent. Keep volunteering. She smiled faintly. That's all any of us can do. He managed a small, grateful nod before stepping outside into the pale afternoon light. When the bell stopped chiming, the diner stayed quiet for a long moment. Michael finally broke the silence. You didn't have to be that kind. Sarah sighed. Maybe not, but somebody once was that kind to me. Michael smiled faintly. That's the best kind of payback. The two of them stood by the window, watching Chad walk toward his truck. He paused before getting in, looking back once, not for recognition but for peace. And maybe, for the first time, he had some. Sarah turned back to the counter, eyes settling on the framed photograph behind the register. She traced the air in front of it lightly, over the faces of those who hadn't come home. Do you think they'd be proud? She asked softly. Michael's voice was steady. They already are. Outside, the last light of day slid across the street, painting everything in gold. Inside, Mel's diner hummed again, the comforting sounds of plates, coffee, and conversation filling the air like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. Life had found its pace again. But it wasn't the same as before. It was better. A few weeks later, Sarah visited the Veterans Center for the first time. She didn't plan to speak, just to look. The walls were covered in photos and letters. And near the back, taped to a bulletin board, was one she recognized, the photo of her and her squad. Someone had written underneath in neat, block letters, "The medic who never gave up." She stood there for a long time, her hand pressed to the glass. Then she noticed another photo nearby, Chad, painting a wheelchair ramp, smiling for the first time in what looked like years. It made her smile too. As she turned to leave, an older woman in a volunteer vest stopped her. "You're Sarah Miller, right?" Sarah nodded cautiously. The woman smiled. "My son served. He didn't make it back, but he used to talk about his medic, said she was fearless." Her eyes shimmered. "Thank you." Sarah hesitated, then hugged her. It was quick, quiet, but full of meaning. When she stepped back, she said softly, "We were all scared. We just kept moving." That night, Sarah walked home alone. The air was cold, the streets nearly empty. She stopped once under a street lamp, her breath visible in the light. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had pulled men from fire, held rifles, held coffee cups, held too much. For years she'd hated them. Now she saw them for what they were, proof she'd lived. A faint smile touched her lips. The fire no longer whispered. It had gone quiet, replaced by something steadier, calmer, almost forgiving. Maybe healing wasn't a straight line. Maybe it was a circle, one that always led back to the people who reminded you who you were. As she turned toward home, her voice echoed softly in her mind. Everyone deserves a second chance. And somewhere, far away, the world that once mocked her had begun to believe it too. What happens when the world starts calling your pain a story? It began slowly, one interview request at a time. Then a magazine feature. Then a national morning show. Sarah Miller had tried to say no to most of them, but the world had other plans. The video from Mel's diner wasn't just viral anymore, it was legendary. Veteran groups called it the moment America remembered humility. The image of her scarred arm and tattoo, Unit 47, Ramadi, had become a symbol of quiet strength. People printed it on shirts. Someone even made a mural in her hometown, a larger-than-life portrait of her looking skyward, eyes fierce, beneath the words "Scars tell stories." She hated that mural. Not because it wasn't beautiful, it was, but because every time she saw it, she remembered the faces that weren't painted beside her. Still, she didn't tear it down. She just walked past it quickly. By February, she couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. Strangers stopped her on the street, wanting photos or to tell her how brave she was. Some cried, some thanked her. Some told her their sons or daughters had joined the service because of her. And while Sarah smiled politely each time, inside something ached. The world saw a hero. But Sarah knew the truth. She was just a survivor with a debt she could never repay. Then came the call that would change everything again. It was a cold morning, gray skies pressing low over town. Sarah was wiping down the counter when Bob handed her the cordless phone. He mouthed, "It's important." She hesitated before taking it. "This is Sarah." "Sergeant Miller." The voice on the other end was firm but kind, measured, military. "This is Colonel Adams with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I wanted to reach out personally. We're launching a new rehabilitation and outreach program for wounded veterans, especially those struggling to reintegrate. We'd like you to help us lead it." Sarah blinked, confused. "Lead it? I'm not qualified for that." The colonel chuckled. "You're more qualified than anyone we've found. You lived it. You survived it. We don't need perfect, we need real." She stayed quiet for a long moment. He filled the silence softly. "You wouldn't be alone. We'd assign a small team. You speak, mentor, travel. Your story has already changed lives, now it could save them." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. "Colonel, I'm not a public speaker. I just told the truth," he finished for her. "And that's exactly what people need to hear." She wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to. But something inside, that small, stubborn spark that once ran through fire, whispered otherwise. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind coffee counters. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I ask," the colonel replied. When she hung up, Bob was watching her carefully. "What's the verdict?" Sarah sighed. "They want me to talk, to tell my story to other vets." Bob grinned. "About damn time." But Sarah didn't smile. Her stomach turned with unease, not fear of speaking, but of remembering. Because every time she spoke, she had to reopen the wounds she'd barely managed to close. That night she called Michael. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Sergeant." "Don't call me that," she said automatically, then softened. "They want me to join some VA program, mentor other veterans." Michael was quiet a moment. "You gonna do it?" "I don't know. Talking means remembering. Remembering means bleeding a little," he finished gently. "Yeah, but maybe it's the kind of bleeding that heals." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a therapist." He chuckled. "Funny you should say that. I start my license exam next month." "Really?" "Yeah," he said. "Turns out, listening's cheaper than therapy and twice as useful." There was a pause, long, familiar, comfortable. Finally, Sarah exhaled. "What if I say the wrong thing? What if I make it worse?" Michael's tone softened. "Then you'll say something else. That's what we do. We adapt." She thought about it all night. And when dawn broke, pale and silver over the horizon, she'd made her choice. 2 months later, Sarah found herself standing backstage at a veterans conference in Denver. Hundreds of people filled the hall: soldiers, nurses, medics, amputees, parents, families. The sound of murmuring voices rolled like distant thunder. She could feel her heartbeat everywhere, in her throat, her fingertips, the space between her ribs. Her palms were slick. The lights ahead glowed warm and white, blinding through the curtain gap. A microphone waited on stage. and for a moment she almost walked away. Then someone touched her arm. Michael. He had agreed to attend as her support. "If you freeze," he said softly, "I'll stand up and pretend to faint. Big distraction." She gave him a nervous laugh. "You do that." "In a heartbeat," he grinned, "but I'd rather watch you on the stage." The event coordinator signaled her. "Ready, Sergeant Miller." She hesitated, then nodded, "As I'll ever be." She stepped out. The applause started immediately, but she barely heard it. The lights hit her face, and for a heartbeat, she saw the flames again, the fire, the chaos, the desert. But this time, she didn't run from it. She breathed through it. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I was 24 when I stopped believing in tomorrow," she began, "because tomorrow felt like a luxury we couldn't afford." A hush spread across the crowd. She spoke slowly, every word deliberate. "I served in Ramadi 2006. My job was to save lives, sometimes by stitching wounds, sometimes by holding hands until the pain stopped, and sometimes by dragging bodies out of fire." She paused, letting the words settle. "When I came home, people said I was lucky. But luck doesn't feel like waking up every night to the sound of screaming only you can hear. Luck doesn't feel like being stared at in grocery stores because your skin looks like melted glass." Her voice cracked and she didn't hide it. "I spent years trying to disappear, until someone reminded me that silence isn't peace, it's surrender." She told them everything, not just the fire and the scars, but the guilt, the anger, the loneliness. And as she spoke, something shifted. Heads nodded, tears fell quietly. For once, no one looked away. She ended simply. "Pain doesn't make you broken, it makes you unfinished. Keep going." When she stepped back, the room erupted. But she didn't bask in the applause. She just stood there, tears on her cheeks, eyes lifted toward the light, and for the first time in years it didn't burn. After the talk, veterans lined up to meet her. One young woman in a wheelchair clutched her hand, whispering, "You made me want to live again." Sarah nearly broke right there. Because that was the moment she realized this was her new mission. Weeks turned into months. Sarah began traveling VA hospitals, military academies, community centers. She told her story not as a speech, but as a conversation, raw, honest, sometimes unfinished. People connected. Lives changed. And though the fire still whispered some nights, it no longer owned her. One evening after a long seminar, she found herself alone on a rooftop overlooking the city. The lights shimmered below, fragile, flickering, alive. Michael joined her, handing her a coffee. "You're getting good at this," he said. She smiled tiredly. "You think so?" "I know so. You're saving people again, just in a different way." She sipped the coffee, gazing out over the skyline. "You ever wonder why we lived when others did?" Michael leaned on the railing beside her. "Every day. But I'm starting to think maybe it's because they knew we'd carry them forward." Sarah looked at him, eyes glimmering. "You really are turning into a therapist." He laughed softly. "Occupational hazard." They stood in silence for a while, the city breathing below them. Then Sarah whispered, "Do you think it ever goes away, the guilt?" Michael shook his head. "No, but it gets quieter when you do something with it." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think that's what this is." He looked at her, really looked. For years he'd seen her only through memory, the medic, the fire, the scars. But now he saw her as she was, whole, steady, alive. "Proud of you, Miller," he said softly. She smiled. "Copy that, Captain." The wind carried their laughter into the night. Months later, when Sarah returned home, she found a letter waiting on her porch. No return address. Just her name, written neatly in black ink. Inside was a single photo, a group of volunteers standing outside a newly built veterans shelter. In the center was Chad Morrison, smiling, holding a wooden plaque. Below him, engraved words, "The Sarah Miller Center for Healing and Hope." Sarah sat on her porch for a long time, the letter trembling in her hands. A slow, quiet smile spread across her face, the kind that came from somewhere deep, somewhere healed. She looked up at the sky, pale blue, wide and endless. And for once, she didn't feel small beneath it. She whispered, barely audible, "They're still saving people even now." And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Because some wars never end, they just change shape. And sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is come home and stay. How do you heal from something that never truly ended? It had been almost a year since Sarah's life had shifted from silence to spotlight. 1 year since she'd stepped out of that diner and into the open. 1 year since the world began to know her name again, not as a patient number, not as a scarred waitress, but as a soldier. A survivor. She, grown used to the rhythm of airports and speeches, hospital visits and quiet moments between strangers who told her she'd saved them just by speaking. But lately, the nights had turned heavy again. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams blurred into memory, the sand, the smoke, the screams. And always his voice. "Thompson, move." Then the explosion. Then nothing. Sarah would wake up gasping, clutching the sheets as if they were the charred edges of her past. By daylight she hid it well. She smiled, spoke softly, listened to others' pain like a priest in confession. But inside, she was unraveling in small, invisible ways. Because even when the world forgives you, sometimes you don't. It was late autumn when the letter arrived. Unmarked. Folded neatly. No return address, just her name in clean military block letters, S. Miller. She found it wedged between the porch railing and her mailbox, almost as if someone had placed it there by hand. She hesitated before opening it, that old soldier's instinct flickering again, the one that told her danger didn't always wear a uniform. The paper inside was thin, aged around the edges. A single line at the top caught her eye. "Found this while closing out old case files. Thought you should have it." Below that, a document heading. After Action Report, RAMADI, July 15, 2006. Her breath caught. She read slowly, her pulse quickening. Subject: Casualty Extraction, Unit 47. Medic: SGT. S. Miller sustained severe degree burns during rescue operations. Presumed KIA on field report until medevac confirmed pulse. Following initial explosion, secondary device detonated approximately 43 seconds later. Survivor testimony: Private T. Thompson. "I remember someone pulling me. The fire was everywhere. I couldn't see who it was. They said she didn't make it, but I heard her voice through the smoke. She said, 'You're not done yet, get up.' I got up. That's the only reason I'm alive." Sarah's hands trembled so violently, the paper rattled. Thompson. She thought he hadn't survived. But there it was, testimony. The bottom of the page had one last line written in pen, not typed. Different handwriting. "Private Thompson passed away last year. He left this note before he did." A small folded slip fell from the envelope. Her name again, written shakily. She unfolded it. "I saw you. You saved me. I couldn't tell anyone. I didn't remember until later after the morphine. I heard your voice in the flames. I lived because of you. I'm sorry it took me this long to say thank you. You carried me out, and I've carried that day ever since. T. Thompson." Sarah read it 3 times before realizing she was crying. For 18 years, she'd carried the guilt of losing him, the belief that her failure had cost another life. And now, after all that time, she learned the truth. He'd lived. Because of her. Because she hadn't stopped. Her breath broke, sharp and uneven. She sat down on the steps, letter in hand, staring at the horizon. The autumn wind moved through the trees, scattering dry leaves across the porch. For a moment it sounded like sand again, soft, whispering familiar. She thought about the voice in her dreams, the one she always heard screaming her name. Maybe it was an accusation after all. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe she'd been hearing him. That night she called Michael. He picked up immediately. "You okay?" Her voice cracked. "I got a letter." "What kind of letter?" She told him the report, the testimony, the note. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally he said softly, "You needed to know that." "I didn't even know I was waiting for it," she whispered. "All these years I thought I failed him." "You didn't fail anyone, Sarah. You saved us all." Her voice broke again. "Then why does it still hurt?" Michael sighed. "Because you loved them, because you still do. That's what keeps you human." She laughed through tears. "You and your therapist talk." He smiled on the other end. "It's cheaper than whiskey." They stayed on the phone for hours, not saying much, just breathing together through the static. For once, she didn't feel alone inside her silence. The next morning, she drove to the Veterans Cemetery on the edge of town. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that didn't ask for permission. She carried the letter in her jacket pocket. The wind was cold, biting at her face, but she didn't mind. She found his name easily, THOMPSONTCPL, U.S. Army. There were fresh flowers already there, maybe from family, maybe from strangers. Sarah knelt in front of the grave and placed the letter down. Her hand lingered on the stone. "Hey, Thompson," she said softly. It felt strange, talking to a ghost you never stopped hearing. "I thought you were gone. Guess I was wrong." Her lips trembled. "You said I told you to get up. Funny thing is, I've been trying to get up ever since." She smiled faintly through her tears. "I got your message. Took you long enough." The wind stirred again, warm this time, softer. She took a deep breath. "Thank you," she whispered, "for remembering me when I couldn't remember myself." She stayed like that for a long while, her fingers tracing the engraved letters until her hands went numb. Then she stood, saluted quietly, not for protocol but for peace, and turned back toward her truck. As she reached the gate, she saw someone waiting near the road. "Michael." He didn't speak, didn't ask how she was. He just nodded once, the kind of nod that said, "I understand." They walked together toward the parking lot. "He's at rest," Michael said finally. "Yeah," Sarah replied, "and maybe now so am I." In the weeks that followed, Sarah carried Thompson's note with her everywhere, tucked inside her wallet like a quiet heartbeat. Sometimes when she spoke at veteran centers, she'd read the final line aloud. "You're not done yet, get up." It became a mantra for others, a message that rippled outward into countless lives she would never meet. But for Sarah, it was more than that. It was closure and rebirth. Her talks changed after that. They were less about pain, more about purpose. Less about scars, more about what comes after them. She told audiences, healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without breaking. People began to write that down too. Her words had weight now, not because they were profound but because they were earned. Winter returned before she noticed. The diner's windows frosted over again, the hum of the heater filling the early mornings. Sarah had gone back to part-time shifts, not for money, but for grounding. There was comfort in small things. The smell of coffee, the clatter of plates, the sound of Bob's gravelly laugh from the kitchen. Sometimes, new customers would recognize her and ask, "Aren't you the woman from that video?" She'd smile and say, "Used to be." Because she wasn't that woman anymore, not the victim, not the symbol. Just Sarah. Human whole. One snowy evening, as she was closing up, Michael came in, brushing frost from his jacket. He slid a folder onto the counter. "What's that?" she asked. "Your next mission," he said, smiling faintly. She raised an eyebrow. "You're starting to sound like HQ again." He chuckled. "Maybe I am." She opened the folder. Inside were photos of young veterans, all burn victims, all recent discharges, and a proposal for a new foundation. The Thompson Initiative, a mentorship and therapy program for combat survivors with physical trauma. Sarah's throat tightened. "You did this." He shook his head. "We did. The VA's on board. They want you to lead it." She looked at the photos, faces young and worn, eyes haunted but alive. "This is big," she murmured. Michael smiled. "So was the fire. You ran through that too." She closed the folder slowly, exhaling. "Okay," she whispered, "let's do it." Michael grinned. "That's my sergeant." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide the warmth spreading through her chest. That night, after everyone had gone home, Sarah stood outside under the snowfall, looking up at the sky. Snowflakes melted on her cheeks, cold against the faint burn ridges of her skin. She thought about Thompson, about Rodriguez, about the ones who never made it back. And for the first time, she didn't feel haunted by their absence, only guided by it. The snow muffled everything, sound, light, thought. She closed her eyes and let it fall around her like a benediction. In that moment, she understood something she hadn't before. Healing wasn't about forgetting the fire. It was about learning how to walk through the snow and feel the warmth underneath it. When she opened her eyes, the horizon was beginning to glow, the faint promise of dawn. Sometimes peace doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it comes in fragments, a letter, a voice, a snowfall. And sometimes it comes when you finally stop asking for permission to be whole. When does healing become legacy? The question echoed softly in Sarah Miller's mind as she stood before the glass doors of a brand new building on the edge of town, steel and sunlight woven together, the American flag rising quietly beside it. The plaque at the entrance read, in clean bronze letters, "The Thompson Initiative. A place for recovery, resilience, and remembrance." It was opening day. She stood there in a simple black jacket, her hands clasped loosely before her. The winter wind cut through the air, but she didn't flinch. Cold didn't scare her anymore. She lived through worse things than weather. A crowd had gathered, veterans, families, reporters, neighbors, people from all over. Some came for curiosity. Most came for gratitude. Michael stood at her side, straight-backed in his old uniform jacket, looking proud but grounded. He gave her a small nod. "You ready?" Sarah smiled faintly. "You really need to stop asking me that. I'm never ready." He chuckled softly. "And yet you always show up." The ribbon was red, thick, bright against the morning gray. When she took the scissors from the podium, her hands didn't shake. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about who she used to be or what she'd lost. She was thinking about what could come next. The blades closed with a clean, final snap. Applause rose like a wave, strong, honest, alive. Inside, the air smelled faintly of new paint and hope. The hallways gleamed with portraits, not of generals or politicians, but of ordinary soldiers. Men and women with prosthetic limbs, burned scars, missing eyes, or soft smiles that still reached them. Each one had a short quote beneath it. Each one carried a story. The main lobby was wide and bright, sunlight pouring through the skylight. A mural stretched across one wall, a painting of the desert at dawn. In the center stood a woman in fatigues, walking through fire toward the light. Her face wasn't clear, but her silhouette was unmistakable. Above her, painted words read, "You're not done yet, get up." Sarah stopped and stared at it for a long time. Michael stood beside her, voice low. "They finished it last week. The artist said he wanted people to feel courage, not pity." She swallowed hard. They'll feel both, that's okay too. She walked through the building, past physical therapy rooms, counseling offices, a quiet garden out back where veterans could sit under the trees and just breathe. She paused near a wall covered with plaques, each one engraved with the name of someone who donated or volunteered. And near the bottom, in smaller letters, one name caught her eye. Chad Morrison. Next to it, in honor of all who learned too late and changed anyway. Sarah smiled softly. Maybe redemption didn't erase mistakes. Maybe it grew in the cracks they left behind. A small crowd gathered near the main podium for the dedication ceremony. She took her place beside the microphone, the weight of the moment heavy but right. When the crowd quieted, she began. "I've been asked to speak about resilience," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about what you do after you do." She paused, letting the words breathe. "I used to think my scars were reminders of failure, of pain, but I've learned they're proof that I survived things that tried to destroy me, proof that I was there and I didn't quit." A ripple of stillness moved through the audience. "I'm not special," she continued. "I'm not brave all the time. I've been angry, afraid, ashamed. I've spent years trying to disappear. But the truth is, disappearing doesn't make the pain go away. It just makes the world quieter for a while. And silence," she said softly, "can be louder than war." She looked out at the faces in front of her. Young soldiers, old veterans, families holding photos. "I want this place to be a home for every story that never got told. For the ones who came back but didn't feel like they did. For those who can't sleep, who can't forget, who think their fight ended when they came home. It didn't, it just changed." Her voice grew steadier. "Here, you don't have to be a hero. You just have to show up. That's enough." She stepped back. Applause came again, softer this time, respectful, emotional. It wasn't celebration, it was acknowledgement. As the ceremony ended, people moved through the building, exploring, touching the walls, reading the names. Sarah lingered by the back window, watching the wind ripple through the memorial garden. Michael joined her again, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said. Sarah smiled faintly. "Neither did I." He nodded toward the crowd. "You changed a lot of lives." She shook her head. "They changed mine first." He looked at her, eyes full of quiet admiration. "You ever going to let yourself believe you're a hero?" She smiled sadly. "Heroes die in deserts, Mike. I just survived mine." He didn't argue. He knew that tone, humble, grounded, true. The door opened behind them. A teenage girl in a volunteer vest approached nervously. "Ma'am," she said softly, "someone left this for you." She handed Sarah a small box, wrapped in brown paper. No name, no return address. Sarah frowned slightly, untying the string. Inside was a medal scorched at the edges, half melted. An old Army commendation medal. And a note. "Found this in a surplus store last week. Thought it belonged to someone who earned it more than most. A friend." She stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't about recognition. It was about memory, a piece of her past coming home. She placed the medal gently into a shadow box near the mural. No label, no explanation. Just a silent tribute. Weeks turned into months again. The Thompson Initiative grew, programs expanded, stories multiplied, laughter echoed through its halls. And every day, Sarah arrived early and stayed late, her presence quiet but constant. She wasn't leading from a podium anymore. She was teaching, mentoring, listening, healing. Her days were full, her nights calmer. The nightmares came less often, and when they did, she could breathe through them now. Sometimes in dreams, she saw Thompson again, not burning, not screaming, just standing. Smiling. "Get up," he would say. And she always did. One evening, long after closing, Sarah sat in the garden alone. The air was cool, the sky painted in fading orange and violet. Wind moved through the leaves like a soft hymn. She closed her eyes and listened. In the distance, a flag rustled. Somewhere a door clicked shut. And in that space between sounds, she heard her own heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. Her life had become something new, not an escape from the past, but a continuation of it. Every scar, every tear, every small kindness had led here. To this peace, to this purpose. She thought about that diner, the laughter, the shame, the moment her sleeve slipped and everything changed. Funny how pain could turn into possibility when you stop running from it. Funny how sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the first day of something beautiful. The garden lights flickered on, casting soft gold across the pathways. She looked up at the flag, whispering to no one and everyone at once. Thank you for keeping me alive long enough to understand. Later that night she wrote in her journal, the same one she'd carried since Germany, pages yellowed and torn. Remedy taught me how to fight. Silence taught me how to survive. But people, they taught me how to live. She paused, pen hovering, then added one more line. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed the notebook and set it on the desk, beside a small photo of her squad, Rodriguez, Thompson, Kelly, all smiling in a world that still felt endless. The edges of the photo were worn, but the faces hadn't faded. Neither had her memory. She touched the picture gently. I carried you, she whispered. Now I'll carry others. She stood, turning off the light. The room fell into darkness, but it wasn't the kind that frightened her anymore. It was calm, whole, final. The next morning, dawn broke over the Thompson initiative like a slow heartbeat, soft, patient, unstoppable. Veterans filed in for their sessions. Volunteers laughed quietly near the door. And on the far wall, sunlight caught the words beneath the mural. You're not done yet, get up. If you stood there long enough, you could almost hear it, the echo of a voice from another lifetime, carried through time, through fire, through silence. Sarah walked the halls with her coffee in hand, nodding to staff and patients alike. She passed by the main lobby where a young soldier burned still fresh, eyes haunted, sat alone, staring at the mural. She stopped beside him. First day, she asked gently. He nodded. She smiled, you'll be okay. He looked up uncertain. How do you know? Sarah paused, her eyes glimmering with memory. Because I was you, she said, and I'm still here. He nodded slowly. She gave his shoulder a light touch and walked on, the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall, steady, grounded, alive. Outside, the morning light stretched across the flag, across the plaque, across every scarred wall that had been built by wounded hands and stubborn hope. And for a moment, the world felt still, as if it was holding its breath for her. Because the story of Sarah Miller wasn't about glory or medals. It wasn't about fire or fame. It was about what comes after. The quiet courage of waking up. The grace of showing up again and again, even when no one's watching. The truth that some heroes don't roar. They heal. And when she finally stepped out into the daylight, the wind carried her whisper like a prayer, faint but eternal. We're never really done. We just learn how to keep going. The camera of life would have followed her from behind, her silhouette moving toward the sunrise, slow and steady. No music swelling, no grand salute. Just the sound of boots on pavement, breath in cold air, and a soul that had found its way home. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't need an audience. It just needs a heart that still beats, despite everything. And sometimes, the bravest thing a soldier can do is lie.